Hi there, Scott. I'm excited to welcome you to the Shift series.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's such an honor and such a pleasure. I really owe so much of my own healing journey to you and your work and your voice, and have been following you for quite some time. Very excited to be bringing this interview out to the chronic wellness and full circle communities. And I just want to thank you again for your time today.
Wow, I didn't even know that you had followed my work that closely, so that's touching. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. You were very much the beacon of light when I was in my own dark night of the soul. And long before I had moved from consulting and my kind of self-imposed retirement into entrepreneurship, your online presence was one of the first pockets of positivity I found around healing, and very much has been a touchstone for me in how I have endeavored to bring hope and inspiration and transformation into the chronic wellness community. So I really do owe that to you.
Thank you. Wow, that's very touching. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. So we're going to touch on your whole ecosystem online and all of that. I really want to make sure that everyone listening to this seeks you out and gets on your list and follows the many places that you are invited to speak and share your light. But first, I want to take everyone back to where it started for you, and share a little bit of your story and how you
Yeah.
came to be on the journey that you're on.
Sure. So for me, it was back in 1996, which is almost 20 years ago. It's hard to imagine that I've been on this journey for that long, but so many good things have come out of it. Certainly, there's been struggles, but a lot of beautiful gifts as well. I was in Northern California in 1996 and had just moved out here from Texas the year before, was just kind of getting into my career after graduating from college, and I had a tick bite in Sea Ranch, California. And about probably 9 months later, April of 1997, everything pretty much fell apart for me. It seemed like the worst flu ever, but it was like the worst flu times 10, where it was just feelings and sensations and things that you never had really experienced before, head to toe burning sensations that lasted for years. Really, really deep, dark times for me. And it took many, many years before we even came across the first person that even mentioned Lyme as a possibility. I had been told that I had chronic fatigue syndrome. I had been told that it was fibromyalgia. I had one practitioner that sent me to a neurologist to rule out multiple sclerosis. There was a whole list of diagnoses, and what I really learned is that most of them really are just labels. And to a certain extent, I would argue that Lyme disease is also a label, that when you have the diagnosis of Lyme, you need to be really open to lots of possibilities beyond just Lyme in order to get well. You have to really look under a number of different stones and kind of turn them over and see which pieces of the puzzle make sense for you to explore. But it's never just one thing. By the time we have a chronic illness, it's not as simple as that, unfortunately. But I think there's so many things now that are available to us in terms of resources, things on the internet, practitioners that are fantastic that really understand that chronic illness is a complex thing. And more people do get well. I think we're understanding more. There's research that's happening, a lot of thought leaders in the field that have brought things to the forefront. Mold being one of them that I'm sure we're going to get into, but Richie Shoemaker and his work, and Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt and his work in the realm of Lyme have all been really, really important things for me in my own personal journey. And so from 1997 until 2005, it was some really rough years. Some of those years I was in bed 16 hours a day and really struggled at the beginning for the first couple of years to even kind of get up and walk across the room or walk around the block or anything was really a challenge. And then around 2000, I had been working with a practitioner that was just pursuing everything very holistically and kind of got me back to a place where I was functional and I didn't really have a lot of symptoms left. And I kind of thought the things that were left were maybe just food allergies, something like that. And then in 2004, everything kind of came back. The head to toe burning sensations. I mean, that was probably the worst, just the intense pain. And it was one of, many, many symptoms that I had, but it's the one that kind of stood out the most. I mean, certainly there were the muscle pain and joint pain and digestive issues and, a whole host of things. Like most people, Lyme disease has, 300 plus symptoms. And when you take those Lyme symptoms and you look at the list of heavy metal symptoms and the list of mold symptoms, and there's so much overlap between them, there were just so many things that had come up. But I did get to where I felt, fairly well for a few years. And then when it came back in 2004, I started pursuing then again, what's going on. I realized it was unlikely that it was a new event, but most likely it was connected to the initial challenges that I had had, and we just never really understood them well. So in 2005, I had a new medical doctor who suggested that I go to a lady that did electroacupuncture according to Vol, something called EAV, which is essentially a computer-based system for looking at the nervous system and seeing what kinds of things are stressing you. And at that time, he said to me, you should have her test you for foods and then avoid all of the foods that she says to avoid, and chances are that's your issue. And so I went and spent about 2 hours with this lady. She worked in an outlet mall next to a coffee shop, and she had this computer that made lots of crazy noises for a couple of hours. And the whole time I kind of thought, I don't know about this, but okay. You have to be open to lots of things to get well and lots of tools. And so at the end of that session, she said, this is not a diagnostic system, but my sense is, based on the information that came up, you should go back and have your doctor test you for Borrelia, which is the main agent in Lyme disease, the spirochetal bacteria. Have them test you for Bartonella, for Ehrlichia, and for Babesia, which are the common co-infections that people have when they have Lyme disease. And so we did that, and over the course of several months, we had to repeat a couple of them a few times to really get a clear picture. But over the course of several months, everything that she had suggested, we had supporting data from the blood tests. And so it was kind of shocking to me that this lady, who at first I kind of thought, I'm not really sure this is really the right path, ended up really being the single moment that everything in my life kind of changed. I mean, I got so drawn into energetic testing and energetic tools and things along those lines. But that was really how it all kind of started. And fortunately, this lady at an outlet mall next to a coffee shop was the one that sometimes the answers come from the most unexpected places. So
absolutely. I have such a similar story of, and you're the first person I've talked to who shares this, of continuing to want to hold up the metrics of mainstream alongside the energetic. So getting the testing that matches the energetic work. And
right.
So I have these great printouts from probably a similar biofeedback process showing sensitivities and energetic reads that then match blood work, infectious disease panels, and IGeneX tests. And that has actually been a tremendous asset for me through the years, especially as I faced increasing visibility and also increasing skepticism, yes. Because there are many out there who would still say, you can't beat these infections, or it's not possible that you tested positive for this thing and now are not. It must have been a misdiagnosis. Or it's not possible that biofeedback can produce these types of sensitivities results. And it's been a tremendous relief for me, and I encourage others to do exactly what you're describing, which is to be open. And if it works for you to test side by side, do it, because the more information we have, the better, and they'll probably match.
And no system of energetic testing is perfect. No system of conventional testing is perfect. We know that a lot of the blood tests, when you have these chronic conditions and the immune system isn't necessarily working the way that it should be, a lot of times there are results that are not representing the reality. And so sometimes I joke with people, while the energetic testing has some deficiencies as well, when there is a discrepancy, I don't jump to the conclusion that the energetic testing was necessarily wrong, but sometimes I wonder, well, why did the conventional test miss this? So you have to look at lots of sources of information and use them to kind of put the puzzle pieces together. And conventional tests certainly have been beneficial in many ways for me. Energetic tests have certainly been beneficial for me in many ways. And then sometimes just your own intuition or the intuition of the practitioners and healers that you're working with can be very, very important as well.
So being an ex-tech girl, Silicon Valley girl, very interested in data and process and software, I was instantly one of those people who wanted to keep a spreadsheet, and I wanted to see how things correlated. And that was what brought me into creating Chronic Wellness Tracker and realizing the importance of awareness for ourselves, awareness to that custom nature that you're describing of our own journey. It's not going to be the same for everyone. Did you have a system for yourself of keeping track of what you were doing and monitoring your progress and journey?
Somewhat. Keep in mind that this all really was at its worst almost 20 years ago now. And so it's funny to look back and realize, like, we didn't even have Google yet. right? I mean, so the tools, the technical tools that I had were still a little more limited, but I look back and I have an Excel spreadsheet that's monstrous of like every pharmaceutical medication I did, what months I was on them, what kinds of side effects, what progress, all of those things happened. I actually think that the tools that are available now, like the tools that you're providing and a number of great options that are out there that make that so much easier now. And I think it is a useful thing to do. Sometimes practitioners can just kind of look at the patterns of your symptoms and get a sense. I mean, certain microbes have certain patterns in terms of when the symptoms become more pronounced, whether it's parasites and, the full moon, or whether it's Borrelia and kind of these 4-week cycles and so on. So, having technology and tools like the ones that you're creating where you can fairly easily track a lot of these things, I think can bring out some patterns. And then on a larger scale, I was just at a presentation last weekend in Santa Rosa, California with the team from Gordon Medical Associates, who I think are fantastic. And one of the speakers there was Andy Kogelnick from Open Medicine Institute. And so, Andy has the unique background in that he is a doctor in the infectious disease realm, but also has advanced degrees. I believe he even has a PhD in computer science. And so, he's working now through Open Medicine Institute also to kind of track a lot of these things from practitioners and try to start teasing out what are some of the patterns and, using that information around treatments and symptoms, and also looking at, genetics and epigenetics and how those things come into play. I think there's a lot that can happen in the next decade or so around, pulling all of this data together. There's certainly lots of patterns and things that happen that we don't yet take full advantage of to figure out how to improve treatment. So I think there are some fantastic tools that are available now. Back when I started, it was an Excel spreadsheet and, things of that nature. But I still, I am in the tech field here in Silicon Valley as well. And so I also am very much a, numbers and data driven kind of person. So I can certainly relate to the need for doing those things.
Absolutely. And, spreadsheets are great, and even a journal, but something that gives you that reflective feedback is so key.
Yeah.
One of the things that was surprising for us in starting to get that reflection from having a tool like this was, initially we wanted to offer a reflection of symptoms to treatments, and we were seeing a certain amount of results. And then when I had my own beginning breakthroughs, it was very much not related to what I was taking or what practitioner I was seeing. It was like this cracking open of the soul and this space of surrender and gratitude coming in. And so it was in a phase 2 of that tool that we actually moved what we called general health factors to the front, where we were asking people to track their level of joy, creativity, and gratitude. Yes. And that's where we started to see incredible results. Anything we could do to help people shift their focus to what brings in creativity, what brings in joy, what brings in gratitude. Then we saw the symptoms starting to go away. Did you also have that experience of recognizing that it required some kind of pivot away from looking at illness and towards looking at the good stuff?
Absolutely. And that's why from the beginning I called my site betterhealthguy.com, because I didn't want it to be focused on the negative aspects of illness. Even in, being a part of the Lyme community, I have never resonated with or taken on the label limey. I feel like, the minute you kind of label yourself with this dark energy, it's that much harder to get well. I think that certainly in the Lyme community, and probably even more broadly in some other chronic illnesses, but certainly in the Lyme community, kind of the pattern that I see, and I could see this in myself as well, was many people are type A plus personalities. They were very driven, very motivated, very much perfectionists, things that probably set the stage in large part for immune dysregulation and chronic infection in the first place. There certainly are some aspects and certain emotional systems teach this, that in the realm of Lyme, a lot of times it's about either not feeling connected to a clan, not feeling that you have connection with other people, not feeling as though you are worthy of wellness or that you deserve to be well. And it's kind of a funny story. I mean, when I first started learning to do muscle testing, and I was actually exposed to it when I was really young at like 20 years old, but then it kind of took a back seat for a while. And when I started learning it again as a result of this lady that we talked about that had the electroacupuncture, I would go and I would test, I'm ready to be well, and I would get yes. I'm able to be well, and I would get yes. I deserve to be well, and I would get no. And I would say, gosh, I'm testing myself. You would think I could at least give myself a pass on this one, right? I mean, it's not like somebody else is telling me this. I'm like, deserve to be well, no. And I'm like, gosh, I just don't get it. And so for me, it was a huge part. And working on that emotional realm with many different systems. And again, I think, over the past 15 years or so, those have advanced. There's new technologies, new systems, new ways to approach emotional health. I'm not a fan of let's sit down and talk about all your abuses that you had in your childhood. I'm much more of a fan of how do you energetically release and remove those things from your cellular memory without re-traumatizing yourself, right? You don't need to relive the experience and go through that same, traumatization again in order to help figure out what those are, how they're affecting you and releasing them. There's a lot of great systems out there. Some people benefit from, EFT. Some people benefit from things like emotion code. Dr. Klinghardt has his applied psychoneurobiology and his PK work. The family constellation work from Bert Hellinger. I mean, those are all things that I explored. And I can't necessarily say which one was the most significant because I did a lot of them. I felt like I needed to do a lot of them. And it doesn't mean that the journey from an emotional health perspective is over. There's still things that I know and struggle with, and times when you feel like, gosh, why am I feeling that way about something? Or why do I not feel this way about something? And so, it's always a big piece. But I would say that in fact, I wrote an article with Dr. Klinghardt several years ago now, and it was about what he calls the Klinghardt axiom, which is that there's really three things that we need to look at in order to get well. The first one really being infections, the second being toxicity, and the third one being emotions. And when I started this journey, I really thought of it in that order, that I need to kill, kill, kill in order to get better.
Right.
And, what you learn once you've come out the other side is that's really completely the wrong approach for chronic illness. The second thing being the toxicity, and third again being the emotions. But what I learned from this whole thing is the order in my mind was exactly the opposite from reality. And the reality was that the emotional health was the most important thing for me to do. I needed to resonate with and feel as though I deserve to be well, and getting to that place where you could have a higher vibration and not be in such a dark place. And then toxicity, actually, when we're talking about physical biochemical things, the toxicity, I think, is the next most important thing. And I think the toxicity then kind of is what sets the stage for a lot of the infections coming in. And so as much as Dr. Klinghardt was my number one mentor and the person, other than my mom that I give, the most, have the most gratitude for in terms of really changing my life, his Klinghardt axiom and kind of the foundation and understanding. It wasn't so much, I was a patient of his for many years. Fortunately, haven't needed to see him as a patient now for 3 or 4 years, I think. But I still see him regularly at conferences. We still keep in touch. And, maybe in the future I'll go and have another visit with him and see what else he comes up with. But it wasn't so much the, go here and do this. It was more, this is the framework that you need to feel empowered in order to move things forward. And you need to work on all three of those things simultaneously. You can't say, okay, I'm just going to work the next 3 months on toxicity and ignore the other things, because if you do that, the minute you take your eyes off the toxicity, everything kind of has this natural equilibrium that things come back into. So you have to kind of be chipping away at all of these things simultaneously and in parallel. But, to your point about the emotional piece, it's so significant. And it's, I think, often really kind of overlooked. And part of the challenge is when someone comes to you after having had a chronic illness in which you were told for many years that it was all in your head and that you're making it up, and you have a stack of referrals to psychiatrists, the business cards as tall as, anything, for someone to then come back and suggest that maybe there's an emotional component to this, at first the response is, no, you're telling me it's all in my head again. But the reality is, I think if we didn't have emotional challenges that set the stage for illness from the beginning, we certainly acquire them as a result of having gone through this process, and for many of us being invalidated for so long, right? And, oh, you look great, you know, how can you have all these problems? Your bosses don't understand, your family doesn't understand, nobody really understands. So if it's uncomfortable for people to accept that maybe their emotional state led to or set the stage to some of their illness, I think it's more comfortable for people to be able to accept that the illness certainly can create a lot of these emotional challenges for us as well. And whichever one resonates, the end result is that we need to be working on our emotional health as much as anything else.
Hugely, hugely. And willingness to, set aside the whys and just allow it to move. And I love that you referenced that it doesn't necessarily have to come through those old paradigm channels of lay on the couch and reprocess and relive, that we can actually affect the prism and the matrix just by letting the energy move through and doing some of that trauma release. Oh, that's excellent.
Yeah.
You touched on in your own story the iterative nature and the cyclical nature of chronic illness. And I have a feeling this is tied to your, I want to call it the reverse axiom now, the way you kind of flipped that axiom on its head. But how have those three things served you as either symptoms represented themselves or as you had that feeling of, okay, here it comes again?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I think the thing that most people do when symptoms are flaring is to assume that their microbes are again out of control and that they need to do something to manage the microbial burden. And so again, having the foundation and understanding that not everything is the result of the bugs kind of allowed me to, as symptoms would come up again, to kind of step back and say, well, maybe I don't need to focus on more antimicrobials or antibiotics or, you know, whatever things you're doing in that realm. Maybe I need to be detoxifying more. Maybe I need to be reducing stress. Maybe I need to be, you know, improving my diet and nutrition. And, you know, just as an example of that, at the end of last year, I had been largely symptom-free for many years. The only thing I really had that remained was I would get occasional neck and shoulder inflammation. I spent a lot of time at a computer, and so, you know, whether or not it was even related or not, it wasn't really clear, but I wasn't willing to just stop trying to improve that, right? I mean, I'm hoping to be here many more years, and so, you know, yes, it's just kind of my nature to want to always be improving. And so kind of at the end of last year, I had done some therapies around detoxification that were really significant. And within a month or two, I had gotten so much more neck and shoulder inflammation. And it was really, really painful and very unexpected because I had not really had any significant place. It had been years since I had thought of myself as an unwell person. And yet this had kind of shaken things up enough that I thought, wow, I need to really sit here and kind of think about this and where do I go with it. And fortunately, having tools in the realm of energetic testing really helps, right? You're not just sitting there going, okay, what is it? You know, I've learned various systems of energetic testing, but then I also align myself still with practitioners today that use energetic testing in their practice. And it's a rare day that I would even work with a practitioner now that didn't have some kind of energetic energy eyes, I would call it, you know, a way to figure things out energetically. And in some cases that's you know, intuition. Some people's intuition is a great tool, but if they don't have something along those lines, you know, I tend to not be quite as drawn to it. But having those tools, what I found was when the pain started getting worse, it wasn't microbes. In this particular case, it wasn't so much tied to emotions, but there had been a release of heavy metals that happened, and it created a significant inflammatory response. And so, you know, I had 2 or 3 people that kind of all separately did their energetic testing, all came to the same conclusion. And so I went, okay, great, I know where to go with this. I'm going to go back to doing some more detoxification, focus on heavy metals, all of those things. And, you know, and fortunately, that's all kind of past at this point. But having the tools to think beyond just killing bugs and being able to look at these other aspects of wellness is so important. And, you know, it's interesting. I get lots of people that come and ask about, you know, certain types of frequency therapies and what do I think about Rife machines and, you know, all of those things. And there's often a pattern in that the people that ask those questions about Rife are the ones that think that you can kill your way back to health. And so the problem often is, you get one of these devices, whatever, you start putting in all these frequencies for different microbes and whatnot, and maybe you actually make things worse because you're probably adding to the toxicity in the body, right? So you have to really step back and make sure that you're not overdoing it in any one area, and that you're kind of focusing enough on the antimicrobials, enough on the detox, and enough on the emotional health, as well as, the obvious things. We've got to change our diet, we've got to reduce our stress, we've got to love ourselves more. Sometimes I'll get emails through my website from people that, you can tell there's high levels of anxiety. I get it. I've been there. I've been in that panicked mode of like, oh my God, fortunately that's years ago, and you kind of learn new tools to kind of work through those. But a lot of times when people say, what should I do? Sometimes the best response is, go find something joyful to do today.
Yes.
Go to the movies, go to the park, go wherever. But as much as the microbes and the toxicity and all of those things maybe are driving symptoms, we can get our nervous system into such a state of panic that a lot of the symptoms are really our own nervous system and the way that we're letting ourselves get so consumed by it in a way. And, reaching out, having those positive relationships with friends and family, and if those aren't available, just with the world and movies and nature, whatever it is that makes you feel good. I mean, in the last year, it's kind of funny, but whenever I have a moment where I'm like, I'm feeling like I need a little pick-me-up, I get that Shake It Off song from Taylor Swift. And music is a great thing for people too, but it's whatever it is you can do that's going to help raise your vibration and not let the disease consume you. So I think it's really important. And me having, doing the website and communicating with people, it was even a bigger focus for me, and something I worked with many of my emotional energy people on is, I want to be involved in this community. I want my story to help people, but I don't want to, at a subconscious level, have my body say, great, and in order to do that, we'll hold on to this illness for you so you're still experiencing it and still feel connected to it in some way, right? You need to be able to help people and not need to hold on to it and not need to identify with it. And quite honestly, we could talk more about this, but I mean, the smallest piece of my Lyme journey was the Lyme part. There were so many other things that ended up being so much bigger.
So much bigger.
Yeah.
I so want to go into that piece, that all that comes on the plus side, the silver lining of chronic illness, but I really feel like it would be a missed opportunity to not touch on the air quotes that come up. Both of us, when we talk about Lyme, we're using the air quotes. What is that? You, more than any other that I've desired to speak with on this topic, you've really seen the trajectory of this disease since before it was being talked about, probably in the days when you couldn't be diagnosed as positive if you couldn't prove you'd been to New York, before the CDC would acknowledge that it was in the state of California,
right.
And now into the point where CDC wants to say, okay, yes, it's everywhere, and maybe you should reconsider a vaccine, and a real 180 around Lyme disease. What is Lyme disease at this point to you? What's your personal philosophy on it?
I think it's an opportunity for personal growth is the best way to say it. And, there were years when it was the most difficult and challenging thing I had ever experienced. And I do think that Lyme disease certainly is Borrelia, and certainly is Bartonella, and Babesia, and Ehrlichia, and on and on and on. It's a very long list of microbes and things. But I think a lot of those are also things that affect people with chronic fatigue, and with fibromyalgia, and with multiple sclerosis, and with, so on and so forth. The list just goes on and on. So I think that, yes, we have to be aware of the fact that there is a microbial issue. But then the question is, why is there a microbial issue? Is it because we're toxic? And I think we can look around the world that we live in today, and we can see that toxicity is exponentially increasing. The number of chemicals and pesticides and exposure to heavy metals. I had read in one place that 30% of your exposure to mercury in California can come just from breathing outside air. that there's, coal burning in China and other things that affect, the air that we're breathing here. So there's just so many things that kind of, it comes back to the terrain theory. The microbes wouldn't necessarily be there if the terrain wasn't conducive to it and if the vibration wasn't low enough for those things to exist there. So I think the toxicity is certainly a real reason that we have a lot of these microbial issues. I think our, emotions and belief systems are certainly a factor. But a lot of it, for me anyway, as I've gone through this journey, it's really come down more to detoxification than anything. And I think there's people out there today that probably have the same infections that I either have or had, and they're playing football or soccer or doing whatever, and they don't even feel symptomatic at all. And so I think there are those of us that unfortunately do have some genetic predispositions around detoxification, whether that's MTHFR in the methylation realm, whether that's HLA-DR in the realm of Ritchie Shoemaker and biotoxin illness. And so some of us maybe don't have the same deck of cards that others do. However, genetics are not the end of the story. So, more and more people are talking about epigenetics. So just because you have a certain gene doesn't really even tell you that that gene is what's expressed at this point in time. So that's where, it's a pitfall in a way. That there's great things and some bad things about methylation testing when you're looking at specific SNPs, and people will come and say, I'm a CBS, I'm a, MTHFR, I have, whatever. And they're, again, they very much identify with those things. And so it's great that we know that we have the potential for certain genetic inefficiencies and how we can then bypass them nutritionally with supplements and so on. But these tests don't really tell us whether those things are even in effect at this point in time, right? So we have to look at the epigenetic things like, what are we doing diet-wise? What are we doing emotionally? What are, all of those things can affect whether or not certain genes that we were born with are expressed or not. Yeah. And so as much as taking, methylated folate and, methyl B12 and all these other things, we need to be looking at, well, how else can we influence our genes? Can we do it through diet? Can we do it through, avoiding electromagnetic fields? Can we do it by meditation, which I will admit is it's still one that, I fully honor the value of it, but it's not always easy to quiet the mind. And so, I know not everyone's drawn to it, but those are all things that have such significant benefit to us and to the outcome that we eventually arrive at, that we really have to look at so many things beyond just the Lyme piece. And then the other parts that I find is that many people with Lyme or chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia or whatever, if they're not getting well, and I've heard this so many times from doctors like Dr. Ann Corson, Dr. Christine Gedrick, they're back on the East Coast, fantastic doctors, and they do a lot of speaking and talking, and they always bring the conversation back to mold. Yeah. So if you're living in an environment with mold, if you're working in an environment with mold, if you're going to school in an environment with mold, until that issue is addressed, it is very, very difficult to make progress towards health. And I think that many times, that is something that's being overlooked or has not been explored. If people have not looked at Shoemaker's work, haven't done HLA-DR testing, haven't done the mycometrics ERMI to make sure that your environment is safe, it's a real challenge. And unfortunately, it is not an uncommon story that someone gets sick, they become bedridden, they're in bed in their bedroom every day, right, and they later find that is the place that had the mold. Yeah. Right? So it has to be explored. I think many people, in fact, one of the doctors that I have talked with and speak with fairly regularly has suggested that if someone gets exposed to Lyme, they may have some symptoms, they may not have symptoms, but for the most part, they're probably gonna be able to get by and still function fairly well. If someone gets exposed to mold, maybe the same is true. Maybe
Right.
they're going to be able to kind of manage to kind of hold things together. But it's when you get kind of that overlap of both. And now you've got the mold issue affecting the immune system and the chronic infections affecting the immune system and all of these things producing toxins in the system that you have genetic predispositions and epigenetics in play that are kind of not letting you get these toxins out of the system. So mold is a huge one.
Yeah.
I think based on, and I've been so blessed to have so many teachers that have really taught me this. I mean, I'm not coming up with anything here myself, but like EMFs, for example, that was again Dr. Klinghardt who originally started talking to me about this 10 years ago, and I have since that time slept every night under a Faraday cage with the silver lined cloth, over down the sides and underneath the bed. And I think it was important. I think, especially here in Silicon Valley, if you turn on your phone or your computer, there's 20 wireless networks and you've got, 8 smart meters down the block and all this kind of stuff. So we can't avoid all of these things. But if we're doing things while we're sleeping, which is when we're repairing and improving our bodies, those kinds of things are really, really important. And so electromagnetic fields certainly affect us. Dental issues come up a lot in people, whether it's amalgams that are adding to the toxicity because of certain metals, whether it is root canals in some cases. There probably isn't a healthy root canal. Now, there may be a root canal that's okay for an otherwise healthy person because this is a stressor on their body, but otherwise they're doing okay. But if you're chronically ill, you probably need to revisit those and see, is that one more thing that's kind of keeping you from getting back to a better place of health? And cavitations is another one.
Yeah.
And I read a couple of years ago, probably 4 years ago now, Perry Field's book had come out at the time called The Tick Slayer. And I read it and I got to the chapter where she shared her own cavitation journey and black stuff was oozing out and all of this. And I thought, oh, thank God, I did not have to do that. And so 2 years ago, I went to a conference in St. Louis, Dr. Simon Yu, who wrote the book Accidental Cure, and I highly recommend the book. And I had an appointment with him. I was there for a conference, and I just called and said, is it possible he could test me? He does a lot of energetic testing, phenomenal practitioner. And they said, yeah, we've got a spot open the day before. And I said, okay, it was meant to be. So, he did all kinds of tests with different devices and thermography and lots of things. And first thing he said was, you have a dental issue, which then led me to the next month getting 2 cavitations addressed. And, the anxiety leading up to the procedure was more significant than the procedure itself, quite honestly. But, that was another thing. The interesting part is I had my wisdom teeth removed when I was about 16. So there was infection brewing there, and at the time, the exact one that he suggested was most energetically compromised. I mean, he couldn't say for sure there's anything there.
Sure.
The one that was the most energetically compromised was the one that had a dry socket when I was 16 years old. So that was another thing where there's this focal infection that was kind of brewing there for, over 10 years before I had gotten sick. And what did that do to your immune system? How did that set the stage for illness? If I had not had that issue going on and not had a lot of emotional stress and whatnot, maybe I would have gotten bit by the same tick and never had any problem at all. So I agree that there is Lyme disease, and I think it is a very serious illness, and these microbes are important to look at, but I think you have to look broader than just the Lyme disease. And Dr. Richard Horowitz, he wrote a book maybe almost 2 years ago now, I think, Why Can't I Get Better? Solving the Mystery of Lyme and Chronic Disease, I believe. And he goes into the 16 nails in the foot. And he says, you can't make the foot feel better by pulling out one nail. You need to look at all of them. And he's got chapters for each one. And so, if someone has Lyme, I highly recommend that that's a starting point, is getting his book and really looking at all of those things, the hormones, the EMFs, the, parasites we didn't talk about. But, most people have some parasites too. I mean, it's not we're not in, just because we're in what we perceive to be a clean country and we're not a third world country. I mean, they don't have passports and they don't stop at the border.
Right.
And Dr. Klinghardt actually fairly recently in some of his conferences over the last year or so has been talking about how parasites are also something that the body can use to sequester toxins in a way. So if the metals just freely being in the body would cause, a certain amount of damage, by having these parasites that maybe are sequestering a lot of toxins and other things, metals and so on, they may actually temporarily be serving us to a certain extent. Same thing, some people make the same argument with candida, that candida helps to defend the body in a certain way against heavy metals. So much of this comes back to, detoxification, making sure that your environment for healing is safe, and that you're working on the emotional factors to just constantly raise your vibration and be in a better place.
Absolutely. And I love how you touched on these things don't have to necessarily be hard or cost prohibitive. Laughter, meditation, going to a funny movie, as you mentioned, going to a park, all of these things that are things that can buy you some time, buy you some integration time, maybe buy you some detox time from whatever you've been doing, and bring you into that vibration of healing.
And it's interesting because I hear a lot. I was fortunate to, be working here in Silicon Valley, to have a job that paid fairly well, to have understanding managers at the time that I was really struggling, that let me keep my job. And so I've done a lot of things over the years that were very expensive. And part of that whole thing was most of the expensive things weren't the ones that brought me big help.
Right.
Some of the things that were really helpful are the inexpensive ones, like, having lemon in your water in the morning, or, making sure that your water is filtered, or reducing EMFs, or, coffee enemas is another thing that, people oftentimes just don't even want to explore that topic. But for my pain, when I had significant pain, it was the only thing actually that reduced my pain. And I have seen some surveys from various sites over the years about people that had chronic illness, Lyme, whatever, and what the top treatments were that really helped them. And coffee enemas is very commonly at the top of the list. So it's an inexpensive thing that people can do. Of course, they should be checking with their doctor, making sure it's appropriate for them, and all of those standard disclaimers. But it is expensive in a way, and yet a lot of the things that people can do don't have to be expensive. So I guess the point in saying that is, I realize and am grateful for the fact that I was able to do some things, and I'm very blessed, but I don't think that people should feel discouraged if they don't have that same opportunity, because a lot of the things that really helped me were the ones that were not so expensive.
So true, and I wish I had had that guidance from you years ago. It really was partially pulling myself into tremendous financial strife that forced me to say, no more. I'm not spending another dollar on being sick. I'm only investing in being well. And not only that, but I'm looking for what's available to me right here. And castor oil packs and lemon water, and looking at these simple things like putting your bare feet on the earth. All of these things anyone can do from anywhere, and can cause tremendous shifts.
Well, and that's why I love that your site is chronic wellness too, right? And kind of like Better Health Guy, it's framing things in a more positive way, right? Who wants to go to a website called chronicillnesstools.com? It's just the whole nature of it. So I love that you selected that, and I think it's important for us to frame things as positively as we can. And on the other hand, I understand when you're in the midst of, oh my God, am I going to survive this? Which is what it feels like when you don't have the tools and you're still kind of working through it. I'm not discounting anyone's emotional struggle, but I think the more that we can work on that, the better we ultimately will be.
Totally. And I know this has been the undercurrent of this entire conversation, but it all comes down to when people seek out support, they seek out inspiration, they spend the time to listen to an interview like this, there's still a piece of them that is attached to this idea of there being a destination at which point they're done with all this and they are cured. And I think the longer that you're on the journey, your whole relationship to that concept of what being cured means. Where are you on that, and what does the word cured mean to you?
Yeah, so that question comes up a lot. If cure is interpreted to mean, can you get rid of every last microbe in your system that might be Lyme disease or might be virus, whatever. I don't think that that's necessarily the goal. I think that If cure means an absence of symptoms and a joyful, healthy life, I think absolutely that can and does occur. We have so many microbes in us, on us, around us, I think, at least 10 times more microbial cells than human cells. And in a healthy gut, we should have thousands and thousands of different kinds of microbes, not just thousands and thousands of microbes, but thousands and thousands of different kinds of microbes. So I think that it's not the goal to eradicate every last organism, whether that's Borrelia, Bartonella, Babesia. I think the goal is to figure out why the immune system was not able to do its best job for you. And at the time, it did the best job that it could do, but by reducing toxicity, by reducing stress, by supporting the adrenals, all of those things, the immune system can do a more optimal job for you. And so it's getting to that place that, yes, we need certain things for a period of time that will help reduce overgrowths of certain microbes. But I don't think we have to get rid of all of them in order to feel well again. And like I said, so many people out there running around today that have all of the same bugs as any other person with Lyme, and yes, they have no symptoms, and they may never have any symptoms. Yes. And so, doing those things that constantly keep us on track. I'm very much in maintenance mode now with my own protocol. I still take a lot of supplements. I still do things to detoxify. I still occasionally do coffee enema if I feel like I really need some more detox support, or maybe I just felt a little more toxic one week than the other. I do a lot nutritionally to make sure that I'm getting, the best possible foods and proteins and healthy fats and all of those things. So I don't think I could maintain this state of health by going back to the way that I treated myself in my 20s, which was, we had free Diet Cokes with aspartame in the office, and I'd have 10 or 12 of them a day, and you'd be jacked up on caffeine, and you were under tremendous stress and working 16 hours a day. And, no, I don't think you'd go back to that, eating unhealthy pizzas and Taco Bell. Well, I probably shouldn't say a specific, company, but anyway,
hypothetically.
all of those things that, fortunately now we have Chipotle, so I can have my fast food, Mexican if I want it. But, we have to do the things that continue to support us in health so that we can maintain that state of being asymptomatic and feeling good. And I think that's really what I think of as cure. I mean, another way to look at it is if you are exposed to chickenpox as a child, you don't express chickenpox throughout your entire life. However, you may, as an adult, get in a stressful emotional situation. You may have a car accident, a death in the family, a divorce, whatever, and you may then develop shingles. And it's the same virus that you were exposed to when you initially came into contact with chickenpox. So I kind of think of it the same way. We don't have to have symptoms of these organisms, but I also don't think that the goal has to be to get rid of all of them. And it's kind of an unattainable goal anyway. So if we're approaching recovery from a standpoint of we have to kill every single bug in the system, it's kind of starting out of the gate, a little bit of a defeatist strategy.
Yes, so. Absolutely. Wow. Well, there's still so many directions we can go, but I know I want to be mindful of time.
Sure.
I always like to ask this one question kind of as a parting and also as an offering to anyone who may have found their way to this interview. And that is, if you're feeling stuck or you're feeling like you're losing hope or not sure where to go next, what is one thing that you would recommend that anybody could do wherever they are and wherever they may be on their journey, however many cycles, one thing that they could do to begin to align themselves to the type of mindset and experience of navigating chronic wellness? Just one thing. What would that be?
Yeah, I think trusting that you have the intuition and the information that you need to get yourself to a higher state of health and wellness. Yes. Not feeling as though there aren't solutions, and being hopeful that working with the right team and trusting your intuition and so on, that people absolutely can and do get well. And I think when people lose that hope, it's much more challenging, but there's so many reasons to be hopeful. So I would say, getting quiet, feeling hopeful, feeling joyful, and knowing that there are answers out there for people to get well.
So huge. Thank you so much. And I just would add to that, I encourage you to find places online and people to be in the energy of, like Scott. Go check out betterhealthguide.com, get on the list, begin to follow Scott's work, because truly the more we can surround ourselves in a collective climate of positivity and share resources and shine lights, the better we're all going to feel. And you have been such a tremendous role model for me in that area, and I just want to thank you again. I really can't thank you enough.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, I hope we can talk again soon. And
yes.
Thank you again for your time today. And thanks to everyone who watched the interview. I'll have all of Scott's links below. Please do seek him out. And best of wellness to everyone.
Thanks. And thanks for all you're doing as well. Really appreciate it. Okay.
Yeah,
talk soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.